On A Penny for Your Thoughts, discussing the cost of cancer care. I'm so grateful that this warranted a session this time because I feel like it's so important. I've been an oncologist for 20 years, and I feel like I live in the dream of modern cancer therapy, that patients frequently can have disease control and frequently can have disease treatment that doesn't impact their quality of life, which is amazing. But the key is they can only have that if they have access to those therapies. And the cost of care delivery with new and novel therapeutic innovation, with new and novel diagnostic modalities has really driven up cost for patients. It's driven up insurance premiums, and that is a huge issue across the globe that limits access for many of the patients who would benefit from these different diagnostic and therapeutic interventions. In the US, we spend about $4.5 trillion on healthcare today, every year. And so there is a lot of opportunity for improvement. I'm so excited by the abstracts that will be discussed today, and just to enter into a discussion more broadly about how we think about the cost of care delivery and what we can do to make sure that we're doing what's right by our patients, to give that delicate balance to make sure that we increase access wherever we can. So appreciate everyone's research and contribution. Thank you. Please continue to submit next year. I think this is an issue of growing importance. And thank you to Dr. Schleicher, who's going to discuss it for us, the 4 different posters.
All right, good evening, everyone. Thank you, Debra. This is like my #1 mentor. If people have not gotten much time to spend with Debra, this intimate audience, please do so. So nice to meet all you 3 prior to being up here, and loved y'all's abstracts. Little as overview as I go through this, try not to spend too much time, and try not to just repeat what's in the abstracts, but make sure you spend time, if you haven't already, with the posters, and looking forward to the discussion. I don't want to steal y'all's thunder, so we'll try to take a more global view, especially where I see this kind of world heading. All right, quick, just some disclaimers. So just one-liner about these 4 abstracts just to kind of paint the picture, and then we'll look for discussion. First one, medication not adherence and financial toxicity among patients. This was focused on metastatic breast cancer on CDK4/6 inhibitors in the metastatic setting, but anybody, and we are at a breast cancer conference, knows the significance of these medicines in the curative setting now as well. And looked and saw 90% of patients screened positive for financial toxicity, of which 17% of that were non-adherent. Secondly, looking at Medicare utilization and spending on Herceptin and its biosimilars. We'll go into a few slides on biosimilars. It's a very complex, a space that should be more black and white. Just pure competition is extremely complex behind the scenes. But this showed 48% shift from Herceptin parent product to the biosimilars, meaning it's still about half use is of the parent product. Fortunately, even the cost, though, of the parent product from an ASP perspective has gone down. Reimbursement might be a different issue, though. Exploring the broad societal value of Pembro in triple-negative breast cancer patients in Canada. This is a very interesting abstract, looking at the value equation overall, and as we are spoiled, and most importantly for our patients, of having about 40 new FDA-approved indications a year, how do you balance the cost of that and the measurement of value beyond just what's in the paper itself and the cost of the drug, and looking at things like the value of hope, especially with the tail of the curves we see with medicines like Pembro, and productivity of not only the patient but the caregivers. And then finally, looking at the economic and the qualitative improved value of concurrent liquid and tissue NGS testing in breast cancer. So 4 very interesting topics, which kind of set the stage for broader issues or trends going on in the healthcare system, as Dr. Patt mentioned, with the growing cost of care, yet also amazing patients, and how do you get access to those without creating disparities as a result. Sorry, I'm not good with this. So kind of 4 key market topics that reading these abstracts made me think about. 1, cancer care is very associated with financial distress for many patients. 2, the cost of cancer care is only rising, and a lot of that is due to drugs, which we are so glad to have and we want our patients to have available for them, but also creates challenges with cost of care and accessibility. 3, the impact or the association between financial burden and adherence to treatment. And then 4, just because it's I use biosimilars as an example of some of the complexities around supply chain and financial results of those, but that screams just beyond the biosimilar market as well, but it's a good use case of what's going on. So to start, I think just sets the stage for why we are all interested in being in this room. For any of us who touch a patient somehow, which is probably everybody at this conference, this is very important. So this was an ACS study. There are many studies like this. I will say I haven't found many updated studies about bankruptcy and financial burden. There's a lot of great ones from kind of the early 2012 to 15. I think at that time, it was like 1 in 8 patients will go into bankruptcy. So there's a gap in updated results on that. But this shows that 73% of patients surveyed are worried about affording the cost of their current or future cancer care. 28% depleted most or all of their savings, and 27% actually had debt that had to go to collections. And for anybody who's already going through the fear of a cancer diagnosis and logistics from the many appointments, both for the patient and caregiver, adding this financial distress is a huge complication and distress on top of that. With that in mind, the cost of care is only going up. And this, I don't mean to say that cost of care increasing on its own is bad. A lot of this is a result of new drugs are usually more expensive than the standard of care was before them. And there are obviously many appropriate new indications that should be practice changing. But this looks at OCM data, which I think is the most relevant data for at least the medical oncologists in the room, because this is just as a reminder of those who are not part of this Medicare value-based care model in oncology, really tailored around medical oncologists as the triggering physician. And episode started with treatment with a therapeutic drug, whether that's an OCMOs, whether it was endocrine therapy, immunotherapy, or chemotherapy, are many of the drugs we use. And you just see here the rapid increase in cost from not only the baseline period, which was 2013 to 15, but really from the model starting in 2016, and it was extended a little bit because of COVID, but a 25% increase of cost of care during active treatment, which again is a result of many new amazing treatments, but causes many problems associated with that. When you look at what's driving that, I think not surprising, but the data shows as well, it's really the drugs. This just breaks down especially in the OCM model, where there was incentive for higher quality, lower cost care when possible. Hospitalizations went down, supportive care went down, but both Part B and D therapeutic drugs went up significantly during that time. I think that's due to new drugs, not overutilization of current, but it's a result of new innovative drugs that we're all here to support and appreciate the research, but have to be cognizant of the downstream effects. One of the most real, and aside from just a societal view, but actually at the patient level, impacts of this is out-of-pocket costs on adherence. I love this study. This is very important, back from 2011. And our speaker from New York was unable to be here, but this was actually by the same group, or Don Hirschman back in 2011, looking at just endocrine therapy. And I'll zoom in here. So these are less than $30 versus over $90 over, I think it was a 6-month period. Was associated with non-adherence rate increases from 9 to 13%. I think I remember that. I can't read it well from here. But even $30 to $90 out-of-pocket cost was associated with about a relative 30% increase in non-adherence to these oral endocrine agents. Fast forward to today, this isn't looking at non-adherence per se, although our abstract does with CDK4/6 inhibitors, but from a cost alone standpoint, this was a study in New England Journal by Stacy DeSasuna at Vanderbilt, but looking at just the expected out-of-pocket cost of Ibrance at the time. The first fill out-of-pocket cost expected is over $3,000, with over $10,000 of out-of-pocket costs for a year. So if $30 to $90 affects non-adherence, you can only imagine what this could do when costs are this high for patients. And this is not a knock on Ibrance at all. Obviously, CDK4/6 inhibitors have been incredibly game-changing in the metastatic and curative setting. But how do we allow patients to have access and actually stay adherent to these meds when this much out-of-pocket cost is there? So everybody, the abstract is very good, looking at an updated version of this in the metastatic setting. Biosimilars. The study showed kind of adoption, as I mentioned, of the biosimilars of Herceptin in Medicare population about 50%. And notably, the cost of everything went down, even the parent drug. This is a study, again, looking at trastuzumab or Herceptin and the biosimilars. It took me a while to understand this graph, so let me walk you through first this graph on the left. So this is all relative to the launch price, or ASP, average sales price, of the parent trastuzumab Herceptin product in 2019. So everything's based off of that, okay? The blue bars, the 5 on the right, are biosimilars that have come out since then. The blue bar represents the launch ASP price. You can see it's all lower than what the parent product was, which is great. The red bars represent that ASP updated as of 2022. You see even the parent product on the left decreased down to 70% of its originator ASP price in 2019, and all the red bars are low. The 2 on the far right are because they just launched at the time of the study, so there's no difference between launch time and subsequent years. But look at the 3 biosimilars to the right of parent Herceptin. Those red bars are about 30 to 40% what the original 2019 Herceptin price was. So ASP is coming down due to competition in the biosimilar market. This is just showed differently on the right. The blue line is total cost of treatment with either Herceptin, or the parent product, the blue curve, or the red curve, the mean cost of care or cost of treatment for the biosimilars. You see when the biosimilars came out, over time as more came out, competition drove that ASP down, or the cost down, and Herceptin came down with it. So this on its own looks great. This is reducing cost of care. The challenge is, and Debra's gonna love this, this is a great, Drug Channels Institute is one of the best things to follow for anybody interested in this space. The challenge is that ASP drop doesn't necessarily affect actual cost of care drop. This study here, whereas Medicare, as a reminder for people, reimbursement on the Medicare side on Part B is usually ASP plus 6 with a sequester, which we're in outside of just a few years with COVID, down to ASP plus 4.3%. On the commercial side, it's very different. Reimbursement is just contracted rates before the prescribing entity and the insurance itself. This looks at hospitals specifically with 4 payers. Each bar is a different payer. I'm gonna go to my mouse here again. This is the parent product. This is looking at Avastin, so not a breast cancer drug, but you could imagine this is gonna be similar for other biosimilars like Herceptin. In the Avastin space, these are 4 different payers looking at Avastin, and you can see that ASP is the red line here. The contracted reimbursement to the hospital for a dose of that drug. This is not just the charge, but the actual contracted reimbursement on average is at least 200% higher than ASP. So even if ASP is dropping, it doesn't mean the actual cost of care being reimbursed to a hospital is actually dropping, meaning the insurance is still paying a lot, and patients and beneficiaries who pay for their insurance are paying a lot as well. These are just 2 different biosimilars showing similar trends. If anything, even a higher markup on reimbursement. ASP is the red line. Reimbursement for these 4 payers is all very high above that red line. So even if ASP is dropping, costs may not be. Looking at this other figure here, these numbers in the middle column are just the same over here. But then you look at the range, and this range is interesting. So not only for different payers is the reimbursement very high relative to the ASP, but that can vary widely based off where a patient walks in the door to get their med. Let's look at Mvasi, which is a biosimilar. Look at Aetna. Look at the range of reimbursement for Aetna based off where they get it, from $1,000 to $10,000. So this is an example of based off a patient that has a particular insurance that walks in the door to, say, Debra Patt's office versus my office versus one hospital versus another can have significantly different actually costs of care to the treatment. So this is where the challenges behind the scenes on the financial kind of give and take and flows of money here can be so complicated with so many middlemen and negotiations involved. And then finally, I only mention this because of the new administration, politics aside, but they're definitely talking a lot about privatization of Medicare, which means towards Medicare Advantage. If you look at original Medicare versus Medicare Advantage, the blue graph on the bottom left is just percentage of Medicare that's now gone to Medicare Advantage versus original Medicare. It's over about 50% now. And on the Medicare Advantage side, there is more biosimilar use, so there's some differences there in our older population just based off what insurance they have, if they're getting Medicare or Medicare Advantage, and a lot of that's from prior authorizations and stuff that drive certain behaviors. So lots of complexities behind the scenes that affect utilization of these meds. So kind of putting that all together, and then really excited to dig into some of these specific abstracts that that are investigating a lot of these things. Wanted at least my thoughts on when I look at this and the trends around and how important this research is, because so few people are doing this type of research. And I know Dr. Patt and myself, especially Dr. Patt, spend a lot of time in front of Congress. And to make changes here, you have to have data to back it up. You need patient stories from being on the front lines and data. So this research is so important to understand what's actually going on. But these are some things. So with the new administration and Congress, again, not political, whatever side you're on, but there's alignment between House, Senate, and the administration. You can imagine some changes happening. So what to kind of look for. One, is there a larger shift to Medicare Advantage? And how does that impact access to drugs, whether it's pro-utilization towards biosimilars or more roadblocks along the way? Two, Inflation Reduction Act, which is easy to ignore because it hasn't quite hit us yet, but we can't ignore it because it's coming. What happens with that? The prior Trump administration had talked about most favored nation a lot. What goes on with drug pricing over time, and what are the both positive or unintended consequences, which every policy has unintended consequences, and how does that affect our patients? Three is care keeps on getting more expensive, and a lot of the abstracts discuss this, which is amazing because there's new drug approvals. Does that actually somehow widen disparities? And if that's happened, how do we make sure we catch that so we can kind of make sure we address those problems versus just get excited about the next drug coming for our patients? And then finally, although we didn't talk about this specifically, a lot of the behind the scenes things that complicate things are due to things called PBMs. As reform hopefully occurs, or may not, but if it does occur, and if so, again, what is the actual impact on our ability to provide care? And back to this patient financial toxicity that has so many downstream effects in terms of accessibility to drugs and adherence to drugs. So these are just a few things I look forward to research along the way, which our researchers on the stage here have done a great job of setting the stage for, and look forward to seeing what continues to be studied in the future. Thank you.
So we're going to start with questions. And so if you guys either want to go to the microphone or submit questions online, you're welcome to do that. I'm going to get us started with a few questions. I know our medication non-adherence, I'm just going to say something first. I know our medication non-adherence for folks, Dr. Hirschman and colleagues, they're not here today. But I will say the medication non-adherence thing is so tricky because most patients actually won't report medication non-adherence due to shame about not having access to the drugs. Frequently they ration drugs or will take every other day, try to take a reduced dose. So, you hear about all sorts of other behaviors. So I'm so grateful that that was characterized. I think that's really important. I'm curious about the biosimilar utilization, and so maybe we can start there. It's surprising to see that a lower cost alternative would not be utilized, especially of equal efficacy. We do know that reimbursement has changed over time, and that's a complexity of drug reimbursement because 6 months after the rebate structure, it's incorporated into average sales price, which influences the cost of those drugs. And so that's a complex issue. But I'm curious if you could postulate why you think there has been diminished adoption. Did this come up in your study? Did you ask anyone about their practice patterns? If people aren't using biosimilars, what reasons do they have for that?
So when we did this, we thought that there could be many reasons for it. We don't have any means to collect the data, but this is what we think. If the patients are already on trastuzumab, it's looked down upon to switch it to biosimilars because they've been tolerating that drug so well. The other possibility could be patient factors, physician factors, or even insurance factors where they would be preferring one drug over the another. We don't have a particular answer about why the acceptability of biosimilars have been low, but it is an interesting question that needs to be researched or spoken about more, because we have a cost-saving alternative that has a similar efficacy, so it should have had more acceptability.
Yeah, and I will just say it may be an issue of the financial incentives that drive utilization. So I would be curious to see if, for example, like disproportionate share hospitals may have a higher utilization of a higher cost product because they purchase it at a discount and are reimbursed higher. It's a question. I don't know the answer to that, but usually if there's unusual utilization patterns, there's some reason, right?
Yeah.
It would be useful to understand that better. We have a question from the audience?
Yes. Ooh, sorry. Totally, I don't know how to get this, but there we go. All right, Amina Gandhi from Albany, New York. So just like we've had some movement in sexual health and breast cancer in terms of trying to remove the shame of sexual health and how things affect breast cancer patients in that atmosphere, could we start removing the shame of financial toxicity?
How do you think one might do that?
So I think I have patients who, really large on TV. I have patients who rarely will bring up the cost aspect, but when they do, I know it's because it's troubling them deeply. I had one patient who was asking me how long she had to be on letrozole, and when I said 10 years, she was concerned, and I said, okay, well, what's the concern? What's your side effect? And she's like, no, I'm fine on the pill, it's the cost. So then I actually I used northwestpharmacy.com and Cost Plus Drugs and was able to save her $37 a month. And now she's saying, okay, I think I can take this pill for 10 years now because now it's only $10 a month. But if she didn't bring that up to me, so I think one would be, is there a way to get financial toxicity in reports of clinical trials? Can we have that information so more people are aware of it, and including physicians are aware of it, that we could start bringing this stuff up, or have somebody in the office start talking to patients about, the potential financial toxicity and then what the other options might be?
So it's a great call out. I'll say that I would be concerned. I'm curious what y'all's thoughts are. I would be concerned that it doesn't solve the problem entirely because I think some people don't bring it up. But a few things that have been brought up. One, many practices have adopted a practice of having every patient that's undergoing therapy meet with a financial benefits representative, someone to help them understand what their out-of-pocket costs will be and what their benefits are. I think that's really useful. My practice does this. My practice really initiated this at the beginning of the CMMI alternative payment model pilot, the oncology care model, and that was really useful, but we decided to do it for all patients. So I think that's an opportunity that patients might have to have those discussions. It's really useful. But one other thing that's been discussed along the line of ePROs, electronic patient-reported outcomes instruments, is having a survey of financial toxicity also. So patients don't have to say it in front of their doctor, but they could report their symptom of financial toxicity without having to discuss it. Have you guys thought about that?
Yeah, so there's actually a measure, the facet cost measure, out of a group from Chicago that I worked with a bit during my postdoc. And I think, to your point, realizing that financial toxicity is impacting everyone, regardless of the means that the patient may walk into your office, or in my case, like the infusion pharmacy with, they're still having their income being changed, their available spending being changed every month. And I think removing the barrier by asking the question of everybody, however you do it, and then removing some of the stigma around the resources being given. So there's a ton of, and this will probably share some of my political leaning, but a ton of means testing that still exists in getting these resources out to patients. And so doing a better job of, you know what? Everyone gets a parking voucher when you're there for an infusion appointment longer than 10 minutes. Everyone gets a free sandwich and, a can of Shasta Cola or whatever your clinic offers, and sort of getting rid of some of the unseen financial toxicities that may impact all of those patients, so that everyone's less stressed about maybe being singled out by the social worker bringing over a bundle of resources to you during infusion.
That's great input. Any other thoughts?
Back to the importance of this type of research is somewhat like normalizing how common financial toxicity is, so that you're not an anomaly if you're having trouble paying for your meds. It's almost expected, like this is very hard and almost every patient has problems with this. How can we help? And some of that is having a financial, meeting with every single patient. You're not singling anybody out, but continuing to, and the lay press is pretty good about picking up. I think people understand as cost gets expensive that it's hard, but I think normalization, not that that's the only solution at all, but that's where research continues to feed into it's okay to have a problem with pain.
I'd love to talk for a minute about how you decide if a drug is of value based on the cost. I think this is an area that is pretty controversial in the United States. There are other countries that have some pretty clear-cut guidelines as how they think about this. Like in Europe, for example, NICE frequently uses the ICER incremental cost effectiveness ratio as they think about inclusion of different therapies. But I can remember learning about NICE and ICERs 20 years ago when I was a baby oncologist, and we were talking about the benefit of Taxotere, which was expensive, and that was a $3,000 drug. And now we're talking about doublets and triplets that are in excess of $20,000 per month for patients with advanced breast cancer. So that barometer has changed pretty substantially. When do you think a drug should be considered, pertinent to the pembrolizumab abstract? If it is of value, is it just for these expensive drugs that we bring in? Is this an assessment you think that there's a role for in some countries that have budgets for all drugs? Have you guys given any thought to that?
That's an interesting question. I'm going to start with I don't do U.S. health economics. No nifty U.S. accent. My background actually is in Canadian and European health economics, where yes, I get to deal with NICE a lot. In the NICE model, if there is a new treatment at any cost, it must go through the evaluation. I think that needs to come from somewhere in the U.S. I don't know how you get there, whether it's government or insurance or ICE or not
The organization.
Thank you.
Not the metric.
Not the metric, the organization. How that gets driven, I'm not sure I'm in the best position to answer.
Well,
But it needs,
I guess thinking about it differently, do people in Europe think that that's a fair assessment, do you think?
I don't know.
You don't know.
I think that one of the things that gets lost in a lot of this conversation is that these conversations are happening in the US. And by some of our push away from having a government system that's doing this, and again, I don't know what the right answer is, but these conversations are happening inside the PBMs that were alluded to. They're not publishing their data. They're not being transparent about the modeling frameworks they're using, but these decisions are still going out there. And so I think the patients in the US don't actually even know that they should be frustrated about something. And so I think this is where, again, transparency and sort of openness and talking to everyone about it, I don't know who the decision maker should be either, but I think we've done a really poor job of letting people know that people are making those decisions for them and that they have the opportunity to argue or to push for more research around how that decision should actually be made.
And I will just say federally, while we may not have federal law that says this much is too much, we do have states that have individually had provision of healthcare insurance products for their state citizens that have made economic decisions for that reason. I mean, I can think of states that don't permit transplant on their insurance product and other kinds of decisions because of that cost. And I assume it's some kind of incremental cost effectiveness ratio or total out-of-pocket spend that contributes to that also. And I wonder, as we talk more and more about these increasing costs, at what point that can enter into the conversation in the United States. Oh, we have a question. Go ahead, please.
Making sure it's on. Hi, Donna Short. I run a support group called Cancer and Peace. Cost is one of the main contributing factors that comes up within the group. And we use a lot of resources to assist these folks. One of the primary resources that I found very valuable is triagecancer.org. They actually talk about your rights as a patient, both on the state and the federal level, and they're constantly updating it. But they're also talking a lot and teaching us about appealing, so the appeals process. They said that 0.8%, their data shows that 0.8% of denials are actually appealed, and that the majority of those appeals are approved. And so it's upon the patient and many times to take that upon themselves to do those processes. And so we work really hard just to encourage people and empower them with information. But there's a lot of information as well on resources within the pharma spectrum for assistance and drug assistance, but free drug as well as nonprofits that assist with other things like you were talking about the things in the office, like a sandwich or a soda. They'll help with gas. They'll help with an electric bill. They'll help with some of the things that are just impacting your life overall and your living. So I just wanted to make everyone aware of that resource.
It's a great call out, and I think those are important resources, but I would say over the last 2 years, patient assistance programs have diminished substantially. And also there are states that have passed policy on copay accumulator maximizers because some insurance companies will say if you've gotten patient assistance in some way, that doesn't count towards you meeting your deductible. So they're still trying to sort of put that financial burden on the patient. So it's a very complicated environment for patients to navigate. Honestly, it's complicated even when we have patient benefit representatives that assist patients to navigate that environment.
The reason that we like the Triage Cancer website is because it actually updates regularly, and it's by state. And so it's very individualized to where you are in the U.S. because it is very different for a Blue Cross Blue Shield in Kentucky versus a Blue Cross Blue Shield in New York. So anyway, thank you.
Thank you for that. We have a question over here.
Yes, hi. My name is Renisha Campbell. I'm a PhD student at the University of California in San Francisco with their School of Nursing. And I'm also a 2-time breast cancer survivor with being diagnosed with stage 4 in 2015 to my lymph nodes. So I have, part of my treatment was Ibrance originally and letrozole together. And I remember a time where my insurance did not cover it. And the letrozole was maybe, I don't know, $20,000. This was like in 2016 or 2018. It was a very unreasonable amount, and there was no way that I could afford it. The only way I still had access to it was because the way the medication was taken, you were supposed to take it 3 weeks on, be 1 week off with the Ibrance, and I couldn't tolerate that. So I end up having extra medication left over. So my extra medication kind of held me over until this insurance clearance, came through. So it's really a burden on patients. And even most recently, that was, almost 10 years ago, but most recently, like as of today, I just received my insurance clearance for Veoza for hot flashes. So part of my treatment was to have my ovaries removed, which put me into medically induced menopause. Veoza is a medication that's not related to hormones. I'm also ER positive, HER2 negative. And it was brand new as of last year, May, and I started in September.
It's a great medication.
It really does work.
Yeah, it really
It does work. So I didn't understand why this month in particular, my insurance was denying it. And it was over and over fighting back and forth, doing the actual appeal. And because I have a great team, the nurses at with my oncologists, they stayed on top of it with the actual appeals. So, and this is, I'm also a hospice nurse. I'm in a PhD program. You know, I have resources to different things, but still there's a gap when it comes to having access to everything I need in order to continue to be healthy.
And I would say navigating that climate can be very difficult for patients. An uncontrolled symptom burden frequently leads to premature medication discontinuation, which is so challenging. So, you know, frequently in many commercial payers, if you want a prescription for Veoza, you have to have 3 denials. You have to have 3 failures of other medication that you have attempted to manage hot flashes. Like maybe you've tried gabapentin or clonidine, you know, or an antidepressant to manage your hot flashes, and then they would cover it. But you have to have the failure of these 3 things. Well, at that point, maybe you're 6 months down the road. And many patients, especially in the adjuvant setting, might have discontinued endocrine blockade because, you know, they're just tortured. So it's very difficult climate to navigate.
Because I had my ovaries removed in 2016. So I've been dealing with severe hot flashes since then. So I've tried several medications, more than 3 that failed. And I believe that's why when I first applied for it, they gave it to me, but it was weird and the only thing that anyone can tell me is that sometimes that happens.
There are a lot. Well, insurance products can be quite variable in how they cover things. I'd had a patient that was on a CDK4/6 inhibitor, and they would approve it for 3 months, and they would only approve for 3 months, and then they would have 30 days to reapprove it. And so every 3 months, she'd gone off for 1 month, and then would start it again for 3 months, and then 1 month off because they had another month to look at the new prior authorization. So I feel like that process of prior authorization requires a lot of reform, but for most insurance products, about 80% of insurance products, that requires federal legislation because it's under the ERISA statute. So it's challenging for reform, but it's a common problem. Thank you. Okay, well, thank you guys for coming, and thank you for submitting your research. This is such important work. Please continue to submit to this conference. I feel like this is a really important part of how we deliver the care that we have because, we have these amazing therapeutic interventions, and if we don't have the ability to give them to patients, they cannot benefit. And I will just say, when I wanted to go into cancer care, I can remember as a medical student, I met a woman dying of cervical cancer, and I thought, this is an issue only of access. This has nothing to do with where we are in medicine today. And so it is truly a shame when these things come in conflict with patients getting the care they need. So thank you for your work.